Greetings, my fellow hunters, and welcome. Today, we've got a special and interesting one, a cautionary tale, if you ask me. Basically, to TLDR it, a person had a D&D session, it went horribly wrong because someone had a crush on the DM, and let's say friendships were lost, but I don't want to spoil too much, so let's start the read. Player attempts to seduce DM both IC and OOC, cause complete collapse of gaming group and even an IRL breakup. Well guys, this is the only real horror story I have, and unfortunately, this one completely suited to Valentine's Day. Although, in an utterly twisted manner, very NSFW. The whole situation was bizarre, unexpected, and completely out of nowhere in a rapid and complete fiery implosion of the group that rivaled the Hindenburg in terms of suddenness and sheer scale of catastrophic collapse. So sit back, dear reader, and indulge the tale of deceit, coercion, questionable sexual appetites, breakups, and of course cringe. Lots and lots of cringe. The cast consists of, names changed, me, DM, Dave, my roommate playing a half-orc fighter, was not present for this session in question, relevant later. Annie, Dave's girlfriend, playing a halfling cleric. Rich, a friend of mine and Dave's, playing a zany gnome sorcerer. Trish, the problem player, playing a fox-like reskinned tabaxi bard, because of course she bloody was. She could also never quite decide whether this person was more cat or more fox or both. It was weird. So, cast your minds back to the days of yore, 2013. I was at university, and we were playing 3.5e D&D, for context. I'm not really the typical nerd archetype. I'm fairly tall, fairly muscular, and my biggest interest outside TTRPGs, science, math, learning movies, and video games is playing rugby. And I was on the uni team. I am, or was, being an adult sucks, sometimes a socialite. I like to host parties, I love being the center of attention, I love singing in short, my highest IRL stat is charisma, my lowest apparently is wisdom. Yes, I'm a dude bro. Yes, the exact stereotype you are currently thinking of. That one. It me. After one such get-together at my place, which was inevitably always a strange mix of guys from the rugby team, my courses mates, I studied physics, and my flatmates, their mates, etc., myself, Dave, and Annie were talking. I suggested the idea of running a D&D game, and they were both into it. Neither of them had played before, but Dave informed me that our mutual friend Rich played, which I didn't know, and Annie said that she had a friend that would be super excited to join because she was obsessed with TTRPGs. Enter Trish. Trish was the only person who attended and I didn't know, which naturally made her something of a wild card, but being the sociable person I was, this person didn't bother me at all. And when I first met her, all seemed fine. She was lively and excitable. Her and Anne did both practical effects, designs, and she was artsy and enthusiastic with a real twinkle in her eye, which I would realize all too late wasn't a twinkle, but barely precipitable electrical feedback which indicated the short-circuiting of the sanity wires in her brain. I thought she'd be a joy to have at the table, rolling dice with us. If I had only known the depths of the anime love interest complex she apparently had, I might have realized that rattling noise wasn't her dice tower, but the loose marbles rattling around in her skull. So anyway, from the very first session, the group was great and everyone's characters were fun, if a bit little tropey. This is why I didn't bat an eyelid at Trish playing up that bard and hitting on every NPC. We all had a good laugh about it, and I responded with NPCs flirting or not flirting in the exact same manner as they would have with Dave characters, who often tried his luck, to all of our amusement, with his -1 to charisma checks. Thus, I thought it was all in good fun, and so did everyone else, because nobody would be insane enough to think that imaginary characters interacting utterly meant the DM wants to bone them, right? Anyway, getting ahead of myself a little there. There were some red flags, minor ones by the standards of this subreddit to be sure. This includes highlights such as Trish being a little obsessive about anime and talking about her perfect man, being an exact description of some protagonist from a particular anime, the name of which I don't remember, and the way in which she described her Drabaxi, complete with big innocent doe eyes and playful curves and swaying hips. She also showed up wearing fox ears at one point. I thought she was really getting into the game and playing into her character, which in a really disturbing sort of way was right on the money. She also had a weird habit of maintaining eye contact with me for uncomfortably long periods of time, but I, with my IRL dumb stat and wisdom, didn't put it together that she might have a crush on me. in case where the story is leading wasn't horrifyingly obvious. I was enjoying the group and the immersion. Everyone spent a lot of time talking in character and really getting into it, including Dave and Annie, who had been a little hesitant about RP at first. Trent spent almost no time whatsoever talking out of character. Others mild red flags that I overlooked entirely, but one that stands out from the rest in this little retrospect. And so, dear reader, begins the fateful night. Note that Dave, my roommate, was not present for this session. For the night is dark and full of fox-eared discomfort. It was an RP-heavy session. The previous had been a sizable combat session with one of the villains, and a small side story arc had been completed, so there was a lot of looting, paying of debts and favors, collecting accolades, drinking in bars, being paraded around on the shoulders of all liberated village, all the normal tropes. This also coincided with the end of our second-year exams period, so we were in IRL similar mood. Everyone is having a great time in low-pressure sessions, drinking a decent amount both IRL and in-game. Everyone was smiling and having fun. Trish's character decided that tonight was the night to try and get it on with the burly human bartender NPC she had been flirting with throughout the campaign whenever they had been in this town. Again, I only picked this up in retrospect, but this was the NPC who most closely, although not even that blimmin' closely, resembled me in how I had described them, and she had singled this NPC out repeatedly. Anyway, in this revelry of the villain's defeat and the town's celebration, she succeeded on her seduction role for this poor bartender, and made a joke about them going off to have very scratchy cat sex, for which she will probably not need his back bandage. An attempt to fade to black. Trish was having none of it. Obviously, she wanted to viscerally play out this encounter between these two abstractions in a display that would have made Sigmund Freud himself take the concerned Tom face. She interjected, describing how her character waited for him to go and get her drinks before taking off all her clothes, changing into just one of his tan shirts, and waiting on his bed in a seductive pose, and began to purr. Okay, a little too much detail, and she's a creepy, lascivious look in her eyes while she describes it, but fine. She had a couple of drinks and is a bit too into it. I once again try with, and as he sees you, he shuts the door behind himself with a smile. Anyway, back in the bar, Clupper drunk is in the midst of his absurd levitating tank gun performance when Trish again interjects, pouting a little this time. She describes how her character stares into his green eyes. My eyes are green, the NPC describes having blue eyes, and runs her clawed fingers through his brown hair. Again, you guessed it, matches description with me and not the NPCs. She is now positively leering at me like I'm a cartoon steak. Rich catches on to this and looks as uncomfortable as I feel. Annie is giggling. I assume this was just nervous laughter. Not so. I quite firmly cut to black this time, but Trish looks oddly satisfied and spends the rest of the session, which lasts less than half an hour, just staring at me and enchanting look with Annie. At the end of the session, I sat with the three of them, finishing drinks before they all head home. Trish has to use the bathroom and excuses herself. Annie then gets up and declares that she's going home and asks if poor innocent bystander Rich will walk her across the campus. They abruptly leave. I wait for Trish to come out of my room for 5 minutes. At this point, I'm like, if she's taking a dump in there, that's such an absurd piss take. Just wait until you get home. So I walk into my room, preparing to knock at the bathroom door, and what do I freaking see? I see Trish, and what, dear reader, do you expect that she's wearing? Yep, that's right. There's a pile of her clothes and underwear at the foot of my bed, and her soul's item of clothing are on one of my t-shirts, and her freaking fox ears lying in what she apparently thought a seductive pose was supposed to look like. If the only time you had heard the word seduction was in Japanese, and the sentence ended with senpai, and as if this wasn't absurd and insane enough, she also freaking purrs at me before giving me this look, which basically amounts to stuffing as much of her bottom lips under her teeth as reasonably possible in what appeared to be an attempt to devour her own chin, and blinking rapidly like she was trying to convey something in Morse code. Now, Trish is not an attractive woman by any means, even the midst of an mating ritual considerably more bizarre than anything I've heard Sir David Attenborough narrated, but I am absolutely not into her whatsoever. I do not see her in that way, and honestly, I find her a bit weird. Shocking, I know. This should be a good enough reason on its own, but what takes this form just uncomfortably and awkward to shockingly inappropriate is that, at this time, I had a girlfriend, which she and everyone else at the table knew. At this point, I'm standing in the doorway, probably looking like I've seen a blimmin' ghost, and my brain has turned to mush, trying to decipher the incomprehensible spectacle unfolding before my eyes. She then stops, deep throating her chin, and says, "If you want your t-shirt back, you'll have to take it off me." I am now legitimately pissed off with her for this level of inappropriate behavior. I tell her, as calmly as possible, that she can keep the t-shirt, but she needs to leave. She scowls at me, and I truly wish I was joking, hisses at me like a cat. Despite how deeply uncomfortable and annoyed I am, it is an act of such sheer abject absurdity that I cannot help but burst out laughing. She immediately loses her mind, grabs her clothes in a bundle, and runs outside my flat in just my t-shirt, not stopping to put on even underwear, screaming at me the whole way. Apparently, either Anne or Rich has forgotten something, so they're about 100 meters away walking towards the flats. They and everyone else around see this two-thirds naked cat fox woman throwing a hyper tantrum over getting rejected, creating an utter spectacle in the squad, which is overlooked by several blocks of halls, not to mention other students who just happen to be outside. I would have been mortified if I wasn't too busy somewhere between utter speechless disbelief and repressing uncontrolled mirth. Annie runs over and throws her coat over her now hysterical crying Trish, and then starts berating me herself, calling me a selfish and ungrateful, and telling me how Trish is better for me than my then girlfriend. I'm in utter shock and disbelief at this point. This is totally out of character for Annie. Now knowing what to do in the midst of the bizarre and mutually humiliating meltdown, I just gave an apologetic wave and grimace to Rich, go inside and close the door. I call Dave and fill him in whatever the blimmin' just happened. He's as baffled, shocked, and angry as I am, especially after I described Anne's reaction. He calls her and demands to know what WTF is going on. As it turns out, Trish and Annie had concocted the events of the evening together. Annie had informed Trish that Dave would not be present, making it a good night to make her move, and Trish had apparently described the rest of her cringe, including the misguided plan. This is also why Annie was giggling at Trish's in-character shenanigans earlier in that night, and why she had to abruptly convince Rich to leave her when Trish had asked to use the bathroom. This, it seems, was the signal. Dave called me almost 2 hours later, which was almost 4 a.m. by this point, and said that he had a huge argument and shouting match with Annie over the phone, and that they had broken up. I received a text from Rich that next day saying he didn't want to play with us anymore because he couldn't handle the drama. Although I explained to him that Trish would absolutely not be there again, I couldn't really begrudge his decision to leave, with such a sour taste in his mouth. I blocked Trish's number almost immediately after she left. The only correspondence I had with Annie was a text from her that just said redacted before I blocked her too. Dave and I never played D&D together again, though we're still friends to this day. So that's it, Reddit. That's my one and only horror story, and most of it had absolutely nothing to do with the actual game. Sometimes the creepy, predatory widow isn't a basement-dwelling neckbeard, but a pretty girl of half your size and with more screws loose than the piece of IKEA furniture your grandma tried to put together, who apparently thinks acting like an anime cat's fox woman is the height of seduction. So what have we learned in this little story of this? Basically, be careful who you invite into your D&D session. Make sure that the person isn't a crazy person who is so into anime that it almost looks ridiculous. And the fact that the person isn't a cat girl / fox girl, and or that it'll cause friendships to die. So yes, that's the moral of this story. So if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Maybe you have your own stories you'd like to briefly tell me. If you feel generous, please check out my Patreon. Even a little bit of can help this hunter out. And thank you again, my hunters. May the good blood guide your way.